We begin with the big issue. Two presidential candidates in Nashville, Tennessee.
We closed up the greatest economy in the world in order to fight this horrible disease that came from China.
I'm going to shut down the virus, not the country. It's his ineptitude that caused the country to have to shut down in large part.
All he does is talk about shutdowns. Democrats all, they're shut down so tight and they're dying. They're dying. And he supports all these people. All he talks about is shutdowns.
The idea that the stock market is booming is his only measure of what's happening.
We're going to move
on. Stock are through the roof.
Where I come from in Scranton and Claymont, the people don't live off of the stock market.
The stock market will boom if I'm elected. If he's elected, the stock market will crash.
That's his only measure. What happens to the ordinary people out there? What happens to them?
If you want to kill the economy?
The President of the United States, Donald Trump, alongside the former Vice President there, Joe Biden. Joining us now from Nashville, Kevin Cirilli, our chief Washington correspondent. Good morning to you, Kevin. That was the final word on the big stage in the last debate.
Precisely, and now it's all the race to the finish line. And both of the President Trump as well as nominee Biden are going to be flooding battleground states. The president's set to travel to Florida. Biden also going to be campaigning in states like Arizona. And this is really now a key race for battleground states. When I talk to Republicans, they're very nervous about Arizona. When I talk to Democrats, they're very nervous about Florida. And so it's in the run-up to the election last night, what you saw was both President Trump as well as nominee Biden making direct appeals at various moments, Jonathan, for those swing state voter constituencies, whether it's on immigration. You saw Joe Biden come out against catch and release. That's a direct play for the Hispanic vote in a state like Arizona. You saw President Trump try to go after Cuban Catholic Americans in the battleground state of Florida. On energy policy, you saw a contrast in terms of how they are going to be dealing with energy policy as President Trump tried to make inroads with the industrial belt. And then you also saw nominee Biden trying to navigate through the Green New Deal AOC crowd as well as the more moderate centrist crowd of the Democratic Party. And then on the issue of China, which I thought was really, really telling, you saw President Trump as well as nominee Biden, Jonathan, really make the U.S.-China relationship about the impact that it has in states like Michigan and Wisconsin. Wisconsin, mind you, is a state that one prominent Republican strategist told me yesterday after the debate is an all-out political war at this point because Republicans do not want to lose that.
Kevin, we've got to talk about energy. You mentioned it just briefly there. You and I have had many conversations about certain Senate Republicans distancing themselves from the president and his agenda. That conversation now shifts towards Joe Biden himself on that comment on transitioning away from oil. Who have you heard from on the Democratic side that's in one of those battleground swing states that is backing away from those comments?
Well, several. I mean, and they're doing it quietly right now because they're hoping that the campaign comes out and puts out some more guidance and clarity. But look no further than the battleground state of Pennsylvania. Here we are in the middle of an economic downturn when you have refinery workers in the same towns that Joe Biden just name-dropped last night. Marcus Hook comes to mind, where you have refinery workers who are really wondering what that type of policy would mean to go from no emissions in 2025, Jonathan.
Kevin Cirilli, great to catch up, sir. As always, thank you very much. Kevin Cirilli there down in Nashville, Tennessee. Here's the price action. 26 minutes away from the opening bell. We're shaping up as follows on the S&P 500. We advanced by about 1/3 of 1% on the S&P. NASDAQ futures drifting higher as well. A little bit of a bid over in Europe too. That's the story of the price action. We need to get to the story of the fiscal debate. And joining us now on Bloomberg Television and on radio, I'm pleased to say, is Larry Kudlow, National Economic Council Director. Larry, I appreciate your time this morning, sir, so thank you. Let's start with that stimulus conversation. The latest update, please, Larry. Where are we?
Well, the ball's not moving much right now. I mean, the two sides are still talking, and the committee chairs in the Senate and House, the relevant committees, they're talking on a lot of these issues, appropriations, small business, banking, and so forth and so on. So there's that. That's a good thing. On the other hand, there's still policy issues that divide the two teams. President mentioned some of them last night. He doesn't want to bail out poorly run states and local governments and their pension funds and so forth. So that's an issue. There are other policy issues that remain unresolved. So it's very difficult. The clock is ticking, as you know. Be very difficult. Even if you had a deal in the next few days, you got to go through the committee print, and then you got to have votes in the House and the Senate. So it's not going to be easy. I don't want to predict anything. I'm just saying there's more agreement than there was a while back. There are still policy disagreements, some numerical disagreements. So we'll see. It's still up for grabs.
Well, let's start with numerical, then we'll get to substance. Larry, what numerical disagreement is there right now?
Well, I think that in specific areas, I mean, I'm not going to get involved in the negotiating, Jonathan, this morning, but in specific areas, there are numerical issues. Now, President Trump, for example, has said for, let's say, the checks, the mailed-out checks for economic assistance, he's willing to bid higher on that. He has no problem. He's willing to go with PPP for these small businesses, no problem. He's willing to help the airlines, no problem on that score. He's always been willing to do these things. He's willing to help the schools as they, of course, transition and renovate to make school openings safe and, you know, cover the health guidelines. He's willing to do that. He's not willing, though, to pour lots of money into various health care schemes that might benefit folks who are not U.S. citizens. He has a big problem with that. I just mentioned some of the state and local issues and the pension issues, and there are other issues at stake. One thing that's interesting that's come up in the Mnuchin, Secretary Mnuchin proposal, I'll call it the Republican proposal, we are very much we're keen on onshoring for all kinds of supply chains, including pharmaceuticals and related equipment. That's very darn important, and we would like to reward companies that either come to the U.S. for the first time or move back from China or wherever. So we propose investment tax credits. Apparently the other side doesn't like that. We've also proposed deductions for restaurant meals and other forms of hospitality and entertainment. Apparently the numbers there are sticking points. So I can't go through the entire list. I'm just going to say there are still issues.
I think many people feel like we're just going around in circles at the moment, Larry, as we drift towards the election. One question that's been asked by many, in fact, is whether both sides are negotiating in good faith. Now, of course, you're not going to say that about yourself, but I do wonder, do you think the other side is negotiating in good faith? Do you think Speaker Pelosi is negotiating in good faith, or is this just political posturing with 11 days to go?
Well, look, I'm not a political analyst. I don't do personal stuff. I can't get into everybody's head. I'm just going to assume that we've been at this since July or mid-July, that there is good faith. At this point, I'm not even sure what that means. Look, there's very hard-headed, experienced, professional people engaged in these discussions. There are veterans, all right? Speaker Pelosi is a veteran. Mr. Mnuchin is a terrific money man. He knows the budget story up and down, including taxes. Senator McConnell is a very crafty, wily veteran in these games. So they are engaged. They are talking, Jonathan. And I will ascribe, how about this? I will ascribe good faith to all sides. I'm not going to peck away on that. Let's just see, though.
Well, the president's done that for you. Sure.
Well, look,
the President of the United States said yesterday evening Nancy Pelosi doesn't want to approve anything because she thinks it will help her politically not to.
Well, I'll leave that to the President. If that's his view, that's his view. And I'm a policy guy, Jonathan. I don't have a view on that sort of thing.
I appreciate that.
All I want to say is this. We are in a very, very strong recovery. The V-shaped recovery is coming on, very strong. We had phenomenal numbers yesterday on falling unemployment claims and rising existing home sales. But there are areas of this economy that could benefit from assistance. I acknowledge that. I don't think the recovery depends on assistance, but the PPP lending for small businesses would be very helpful. President Trump took the lead a while back on providing federal unemployment assistance by an executive order with a plus up from the states. It would be very helpful if Congress appropriated that in some formal way. There's unspent funds all over the place from last spring's bill. Why not repurpose that and legislate it, put it in, codify it? It's not forever. It might be 3 months or 6 months. That could help Americans. We need the airlines. That could help the economy, put people back to work, get kids back to school. So I just, sometimes think, instead of these 2,000-page bills with gargantuan numbers, why not just have, separate votes on specific items? That's the way appropriations used to be many decades ago.
I have to say, you sound a lot more like a Senate Republican than you do a member of this administration, because that sounds like the position of Leader McConnell. When you say the V-shaped economy is coming on very strong, if I'm a Senate Republican right now, I'm wondering, okay, if Larry's right, why do we need a $2 trillion package if the V-shaped recovery is coming along very strong? Why do we?
Well, let me say, I have many, many friends among Senate Republicans, and I speak at their breakfasts and lunches all the time. But I am the NEC director for President Trump, who has given me a great opportunity, and I'm doing my best to help him out on all these issues. So don't suggest that I'm on one side or another. By the way,
well, Larry, you'll forgive me. It just looks like there's a bit of daylight between the president's position and yours at the moment.
There is no daylight between the president's position and mine. I support him entirely. I'm giving you his thoughts on why these numbers don't add up and why these policies don't yet work. That's the best I can do. I'm not going to predict an outcome, Jonathan. Yes, maybe, no, maybe. I mean, I'm not here to do that. I just give you a lay of the land.
And I appreciate you doing that. Did Leader McConnell tell the White House not to accept a deal?
I am not aware of that. I am not aware of that.
Because reportedly he told colleagues that he had told the White House exactly that, not to accept a deal. The president seems to think, according to Chief of Staff Mark Meadows, that he can lean on Senate Republicans. And from where I'm sitting and where others are as well, there doesn't seem to be any evidence of that, Larry. Why the confidence that you can lean on Senate Republicans to pass a bill that big?
What I've heard from the president, we had a long meeting Wednesday. What I've heard from Chief Meadows, and what I've heard from Secretary Mnuchin, is that Leader McConnell and the GOP conference in the Senate would be willing to support a bill as long as it is a genuinely bipartisan bill and that their asks are included. For example, we haven't talked about liability insurance. That is a controversial matter with the House team, but it's an important key ask for the Senate Republicans. If there's a genuinely bipartisan bill, Leader McConnell has said, and I've heard it from the president, Mark Meadows, Mnuchin, they go along with it. So I'll just leave it there. I can't speak for one side. I can't speak for Mr. McConnell, but I'm just saying that's what I've heard.
On liability protection, have you made any progress whatsoever in the last month with House Democrats?
Jonathan, I'm not going to get involved in that sort of thing. You know I can't do that. I'm not going to negotiate.
Why not, Larry? I mean, you've given me enough information so far on how the talks are going. I'm just trying to work out whether you've made any progress on that particular topic, and it seems to be a huge sticking point for negotiations.
Because you're such a great journalist, Jonathan, I'd love to give you as much information as possible, but I cannot include you in the negotiations.
Larry, what's the plan B? When do you walk away? You've seen this a million times. At some point you realize nothing gets done.
Well, look, we have an election in, what, 11 days? Yeah. So the clock is ticking. The clock is ticking. I mean, just mechanically, it takes a while. You got to vote in both houses. You might have to have a conference vote. Now, that could be done fast, but, it would take a day or two. Just writing up the legislative print of a 2,000-plus page bill takes time. And then you have the issue of the operational executions, all right? I don't know that could be done. Mailing checks, re-engaging the lending programs for small businesses. We would do the best we can. Secretary Mnuchin did a heck of a job last spring, but I don't know between now and the election. So those are still dangling in the air.
Well, Larry, if you can't get it done now, and this is my final question, you've given us so much time this morning, and I appreciate that, thank you. It doesn't look like you've made a lot of progress on state aid. It doesn't look like you've made a lot of progress on liability protections. You can't confirm or deny that right now. if you can't get this done in the next 11 days, why would you be able to get this done before January?
Well, we're going to take this a day at a time. The election results will undoubtedly bear heavily on this. And remember, of course, the Congress is still in session. There's a so-called lame duck session that will come up. You've got a judicial vote coming, I believe, next week with respect to Ms. Barrett, highly qualified, terrific candidate for the Supreme Court. So it's tricky business, and the clock is ticking, so we will see. I don't want to make any predictions. What I do know is this, Jonathan. The economy is running faster and hotter than almost anybody thought possible. And as President Trump said last night, with great clarity, he is not going to allow tax hikes or regulatory hikes. He's for lowering taxes and regulation. He completely opposes a government takeover of health care. He completely opposes an end to oil and natural gas, which would be devastating for the economy. You got economists, distinguished economists at the Hoover Institute at Stanford, who say those policies would lose 10% of GDP, 5 million jobs. Middle-class families would lose $6,500, their whole increase under Trump, which was a record increase. That's what the president opposes. He doesn't see a dark winter. He sees an optimistic recovery and prosperity. The other team looks to me like very pessimism and a stagnation decline scenario. Those came out in the debate last night, and I think that's going to bear heavily on November's results.
Larry, if I was Leader McConnell right now, hearing you talk up a hot economy, I'd be asking why on earth do we need a $2 trillion package? Larry, it's great to catch up with you, as always, and I appreciate your time this morning, and hopefully we can catch up on Payrolls Friday after the election, sir. Larry Kudlow, National Economic Council Director. A special thanks, of course, also to Bloomberg Radio listeners as well. Coming up on this program, an exclusive interview with Bridgewater co-CIO Bob Prince. That's coming up next from London and New York. A full stacked show still ahead of us with Mohammed Al-Arian, Hugh Hendry. Those conversations, the back half of the show, all coming up right here on Bloomberg TV.
Women leaders were actually better at controlling the deaths from COVID-19. Do you think out of this pandemic, we'll see more countries be willing to elect female leaders?
When we look at women leaders, we tend to project on them baggage that they shouldn't bear.
Women are given an opportunity when no one else wants to do the job.
Women had a very clear objective. They wanted to save lives.
The women leaders, if you look at their careers, have also built up a level of trust.
In fact, women have to be better at communication in order to be elected as leaders, whereas this doesn't hold true for men.
We need to get those sexist stereotypes out of our head and give women a fair run for leadership.
Trying to change the stereotypes about women is not only the business of women, but men have to be part of it.
We explore the trends, investments, and competition of the European ETF industry. Join us on Bloomberg ETF IQ Europe.
Their CPG history, their experience, and really how we might be able to combine together to really create this fantastic public company. And so we kind of got into the SPAC thing a little bit before it became such a hot method of going public.
They say the stock market will boom if I'm elected. If he's elected, the stock market will crash.
Okay, let's
Biggest
move on to the
analysts are
next
saying that.
question.
The idea that the stock market is booming is his only measure of what's happening. We can make sure that our economy is being run and moved and motivated by clean energy, creating millions of new jobs. And that's the fact. That's what we're going to do.
President Trump and former Vice President Joe Biden clashing over the stock market in their final debate in Nashville, Tennessee. Joining us now, Bob Prince, Bridgewater co-CIO. Bob, fantastic to catch up with you, sir. Appreciate your patience on a busy morning for us all. Let's just start there with the politics just briefly, Bob. It's the obsession of the moment. For your outlook, what hinges on the next 2 weeks for you? How important is it?
Not much, really. The big actions have been taken, and the driving force of how economies and markets are going to play out still really revolves much more around monetary policy. Although what we're experiencing today is what we refer to as the third version of monetary policy that we've had in the last 100 years or so, which is the first version was an interest rate-driven monetary policy. Interest rates hit zero, that's over. And then there was the QE-driven monetary policy, which works effectively when there are high risk premiums and tight liquidity, but that's no longer the case. So we're down to what we call MP3, Monetary Policy 3, which is the combination of fiscal policy with monetary policy. We're now in an environment in which we're dependent on the government to decide how much money to send out into the economy and where to send it, with the central bank supporting those actions. This is, as we look at the effects of that, we had a massive stimulation in the United States and around the world in the spring and the summer. And there are still the after effects of that, because that created a huge accumulation of cash balances in bank accounts all over the place. There was a big increase in savings rates. And there's still a latent amount of momentum or inertia that can come from those policies. And so that's still in the pipeline. There's some room to run from those moves. And kind of no matter who the president is, that's still really baked in the cake. Those forces are baked in the cake for some period of time. And then the problem you run into is that, those questions you were asking Mr. Kudlow, they're all about the decision process around how to manage the economy. The decision process for how to manage the economy has largely shifted to the politicians from the central bankers. And so that presents risks. It also presents a new world that's important to understand.
Well, you've called this, Bob, the duration mismatch, and I think that's an accurate characterization of things at the moment, that this pandemic is going on for an extended period of time, and the ability of politicians to respond, the collective will to respond, is fading as we progress too. Bob, just putting together some of your thoughts. I remember at the start of the year when you sat down with myself and Tom Keene in Davos, Switzerland, you talked about the inability of central banks to stimulate the economy, and you constructed this idea of the end of the boom-bust cycle with that in mind. And here we are facing a situation where central banks can't stimulate this big boom again, and there's a really original dynamic in the downturn where companies didn't delever. In fact, what they did was accumulate even more debt. Bob, how powerful is that force, those forces, when we start to think about the trajectory of the recovery beyond 2020, 2021, much further out?
Very powerful. It's the most important thing to understand right now. When I was referring to the end of the boom bust cycle, the beginning of that is the inability to create the boom. If you can't cut interest rates and debts are already high, typically a boom is created by a cut in interest rates and an expansion of credit. But if you can't cut interest rates and debts are already high, you can't create that sort of a credit expansion. And so the ability to create a really strong economic expansion is limited. And that puts central banks in a position where then they don't want to actually cause a downturn because they won't be able to pull out of it, so they don't tighten either. The downturn that we had this year was a virus-related downturn. It occurred in the midst of an easy monetary policy. It was completely different. So we're still even worse in that situation than we were then. We're literally at zero short rates. We were not quite there at the beginning of the year, but also zero bond yields, or 50, 70 basis point bond yields. So, the ability to create a credit expansion is severely limited and that's fallen onto the back of government. And so the private sector, as you just alluded to, this is a very unusual downturn. It was caused by a pandemic. It was led by a collapse in income. Normally, the income is the last thing to fall. It was led by a collapse in income because people just stayed home, stopped working, with interest rates at zero. And so typically, as you go into a downturn, you've had a rise in interest rates and a fall in credit, and that gives you the ability to cut interest rates and push credit to pull out of it. Now we don't have that. We have zero interest rates, and we've accumulated debts throughout this downturn in order to augment the lost incomes that people had from the distancing process. So it's a very unusual set of circumstances, and it really severely limits the potential growth rates in the post-virus world, and puts a continued emphasis on fiscal policy as the primary source of stimulation, which then you may get and you may not get, depending on the willingness of any individual country to do something, but also eventually the ability to do something, because at some point the government debts become too high, the printing of money is too high, and you start to experience pressures on exchange rates at that point. I want to point out one other thing that's a very important development. So there's the monetary policy liquidity side, the MP3 that we have going on, but that's mostly a discussion of what's going on in the West. Global investors tend to be very Western centric in how they view the world. The East is nothing like that. And not just China, but a number of countries in the East have done a much better job of managing the virus without ballooning their fiscal deficits and without printing money. And now we're at a point where literally, when we talk to our office in China, they're all in their office sitting next to each other without a mask. We're all still in our houses. And so that economy is much closer to normal, and the pricing of assets is much closer to normal. You've got a normal bond yield, you got a normal short-term interest rate, you got a normal yield curve. So there's a substantial divergence occurring economically between East and West. And as investors, you shouldn't let yourself get completely locked into the West, where you have these intractable problems. We think geographic diversification is a really crucial element of investing now, particularly.
I think increasingly, Bob, people are thinking about convergence. From what you're describing, do you think this divergence between regions can actually persist then because of these structural factors you've described?
It's very likely to persist. You referred to the duration mismatch, and the concept there that I was describing is that how long is the virus impact on the economy going to last versus how long is the staying power of any individual, company, or government to continue to get through that, either through cash on the balance sheet or through new fiscal programs or whatever. And the longer the virus impact goes, the bigger the squeeze. And that squeeze is producing a divergence in investment outcomes. So just taking, and the particular characteristics of it, and I'll give you some numbers, but the particular characteristics of it are that the fighting of the downturn is being done by a massive expansion of liquidity, a printing of money, and the government just showering the world with money. So there's a massive expansion of liquidity, but at the same time, the level of economic activity and spending remains low. Mr. Kudlow is referring to growth rates, but we have growth rates off of very low levels that leave us with low levels. And so the level of economic activity remains low in most of the West and has somewhat stagnated. When you look at the mobility numbers, they're not improving, they're stagnating. In other words, the mobility is a driving force of how much people spend and what they spend it on. And that mobility is flatlining and since about June, July. So the level of economic activity, the longer that level of income and spending remains depressed, the greater the pressure on whoever's dependent on that income. And that accumulates over time. On the other hand, the production of liquidity goes into what we think of as a storeholds of wealth. It doesn't go into all assets equally. It goes into the things that you think are going to be safer, which can be different forms of equities. as well as things like gold and inflation index bonds. So that differentiation of the pressures of the low level of economic activity and spending with the high levels of liquidity is actually producing divergences that are likely to continue as long as that virus impact is sustained. And just to give you, numbers on that, year to date, it's really sort of interesting how, let's say, take the U.S. and the UK stock market. On a weekly basis, they're 90% correlated. But the UK stock market is down 20, the U.S. is up 20. You look at the sectors, the tech sector is up 20, energy's down 50, financials are down 20. So you have much bigger divergences between sectors and countries' equity performance than the average return of the overall index. The average is not representative of anything.
So, Bob, there are opportunities out there, and the structural forces you've just ran through in the last 3 minutes, 4 minutes, they all sound very self-reinforcing, really strong feedback loop. Trend growth comes lower, lower, lower. That means you can't raise interest rates. Therefore, that feeds into one thing and to another. Our tolerance for high rates diminishes anyway because we keep adding debt to the economy. The West just looks like a freight train to lower trend growth over time. One thing that is accumulating, and you've touched on it, is liquidity, savings, and cash. Now, Bob, what I think is original about your standpoint is that you don't think these cash holdings, these savings in the American economy right now will be liquidated. You see them as an asset that will be swapped for another asset. Bob, can you walk me through the distinction and the thinking there?
Well, the accumulation of cash balances around the world has been about 5 times normal, 12.5% of GDP globally, 17% of GDP in the United States. That's a massive accumulation of cash balances now sitting in bank accounts. But at the same time, the savings rates are equally important. Savings rates which have risen to 20% in some cases. So understanding these things will be crucial to the next, near-term moves in economies and markets. And if I just take the cash balances, it's a very interesting question. We've never had this happen before. So when you think about sort of what is a person going to do is sitting on that cash, well, the first thing you have to figure is who's sitting on the cash. And when you look at the deciles, the income deciles across the country, where the money went from the government, it went heavily to the middle and the lower income levels in the economy. It didn't go into the higher income levels. And so at the lower income levels, they pretty much spent it. In the middle income levels, they pretty much saved it. Now, as they look at that cash on the balance sheet, and we come out of this thing on the other side, are they going to spend that money? Are they going to spend down the cash that they have in their bank account? I think the tendency will not be for that. I think the tendency will be for people to look at that as an asset and as a potential opportunity to improve their financial security or the quality of life in some way. So, for example, maybe you pay down debts, maybe you save money for your kids' college education, or maybe I think one of the more interesting potentialities here is, that might be down payment for a house. Of course, with people working more from home, they found that their homes are not fully equipped to do that. And so there's a need there. But also, typically with interest rates at zero, the payment is nothing on a mortgage. And so really it just comes down to the down payment. And the down payment is the limiting factor on housing. And if you're sitting in the middle class, the middle income groups, their largest asset is a house. It's not equities. It's not the stock market. So that there, I would say there's some reasonable possibility that you see more people use that cash balance for a down payment on a house in an environment where the supply of homes is way down, right? Because of the last 10 years of a housing bust. So that's an interesting thing to work through. And then but the savings rates is also important because the savings rate coming down literally does go to spending. But it's interesting what's causing that savings rate to be high. When you look at, once again, at the income deciles or quintiles, it's really the high income groups that have saved. And when you look at why they've saved, it's because they've spent a lot more money on some things and a lot less money on other things, and it's netted to savings. They've actually, if you look at the personal income report, there are 200 different very specific categories in there. Literally eggs is one category of how much money was spent on eggs last month, right? And the big spending has gone to things like, motorcycles, pleasure boats, pleasure airplanes. And the reduction, though, has gone to travel, which is a big number, right? So if people are still social distancing and they're not traveling, that savings rate's not going to come down, right? Because it's not because they don't want to spend and they don't want to travel. It's just they're afraid to. So that is the virus is still the primary determinant. It's the primary cause-effect driver of economic outcomes, both here and around the world and in Asia. And it's still a drag here, and it's not a drag there. And then because it's a drag here, it requires the policy responses that we've been talking about to deal with it, which is then back to reliant on the government.
Bob, really thoughtful stuff, as always. And looking forward to the next time we catch up, hopefully before year end, to recap 2020 and the conversations we've had. Bob Prince there, the co-CIO of Bridgewater. This market drifting higher 5-6 minutes into the session. Plenty more to come on this program with the movers. Here's Abigail.
John, let's start out with the worst stock for the S&P 500 this morning, and that is Intel. Shares of the chip maker are plunging down more than 10%, of course, after they put up a lackluster quarter. Missing data center sales, also a decline there of 10% year over year. Their forecast was tepid. The stock on pace for its worst day since July 24th, which is when they last reported. So the stock is having a rough time this year. Competitor AMD popping. American Express also put up a not so great quarter, missing earnings by 2.3%. They failed to cut costs as they're trying to attract new customers. Wells Fargo, though, up 1% on a report that they may be trying to sell their asset management business for $3 billion, and this stock down 57%, so they can take anything that they can possibly get. Turning to Uber and Lyft, both of these ride-hailing companies are down after they lost a California ruling that they must treat drivers as employees, not contractors. Uber is saying compliance will raise costs by 20 to 100%. Gilead Sciences, though, the big story, popping 3.8%, of course, after their remdesivir, a virus treatment, was approved by the FDA, the first one. Important, of course, John, as we hit a record high here in the U.S.
Abigail, thank you. The big interviews keep coming on this program. Joining us now, a good friend of this show, Mohammed Al-Arian of Queen's College, the president of Queen's College. Mohammed, fantastic to catch up with you, sir. Thanks for being with us. 20 minutes ago, we caught up with this administration. Mohammed, the merry-go-round down on Capitol Hill and fiscal stimulus talks. What's your perspective on them at the moment?
So I think, John, I don't have much to add. I mean, I think three things came out very clearly. One is there are still differences. Larry Kudlow had a yes, but answer to most of your questions. Yes, talks are going on, but, and then give a whole list. The second issue is that there's a fundamental inconsistency that you pointed out to between, on the one hand, asking for a significant fiscal expansion, but on the other hand, saying we're in a V-shaped recovery. Well, which is it? And third, it won't address the longer-term issues. I think, your phrase, I wrote it down as I was listening to you, we're on a freight train to lower trend growth is really consequential. And nothing in this relief package talks to the longer term.
Mohammed, how do we escape that journey, that freight train towards lower trend growth? You've said repeatedly on this program that the lower we are, the longer we are below trend, the lower trend will be in the future. How do we escape that?
We do four things, and you've heard me say them before. They haven't changed. We do better at relief, more focused, pro-work relief. We do better at living with COVID. There's a reason why Asia's doing better. It's not because they were first in and first out. Look at Europe. Europe were first in before us. They got out, and then they're back in. Okay? Asia is able to live better with COVID. Thirdly, we need to address pressure on productivity, which are intense. And finally, we need to think about how are we going to bolster household economic insecurity. This is not rocket science, Jonathan. It just requires people to sit down and start putting in place policies, because you can't do that in a year or 2 years' time. It will be too late.
Well, there are very clear investment implications, quite clearly, Mohammed, and I wonder how you're thinking about them at the moment. What are your thoughts on them?
So I think that we are seeing more and more dispersion going on, and we will see more and more dispersion going on, because in the West, we are not doing a great job of living with COVID, and COVID is the great unequalizer. The strong get stronger, the weak gets weaker. So far, we've shielded a good part of the economy through income support, but the willingness to provide that income support is becoming an issue. So we are going to see much more differentiated, much less universal income support at a time when our economic activity is going to be constrained. So be really careful about what I call capital impairment events, about defaults, because companies' resilience, especially those who don't have access to the capital markets, is going to be stressed even further, unfortunately.
Well, let's talk about the companies that still have access to the capital markets. Mohammed, you haven't seemed comfortable with the rally that we've had in credit through 2020. I imagine you're still not comfortable with spreads where they are at the moment. What is it about where we're priced and the comfort that people have with the Fed? I think it's more of a psychological question. It would be, what would it take to change the psychology of markets and market participants? What would it take?
So first, I'm not comfortable because it's absurd to me that Apple, as an example, and I think Apple is a great company, but it's absurd to me that Apple can issue bond at de minimis cost and then use it for other things that are not completely related to expanding economic activity. And many companies are doing that. So this QE is not helping the real economy. It's allowing more financial engineering. I'm also uncomfortable because of the mindset that's driving that. But that has less to do with investment grade and much more to do with high yield. The market is completely obsessed with the relative mindset. It's all about spreads relative to artificially repressed government bond yields. And therefore, people are pushed to take more and more and more risk because of the relative attractiveness of assets. What is not being talked about is the absolute attractiveness. Are you being paid enough for the default yield? And if that switch happens, and having grown up in emerging markets, I tell you, it can happen overnight. That mindset from relative to absolute can happen overnight. If that switch happens, then the high-risk assets in particular that are more vulnerable to bankruptcy risk are very vulnerable here.
So, Mohammed, final question for me on this, and I think it's really important. The difference between EM and DM, there are many, but one right now is that the Federal Reserve could choose a price on the Treasury curve and sit there, and therefore it should just be about the relative price of credit over that particular yield. Mohammed, your thoughts on that? Why if the Fed just sets the price of the game, why relative price shouldn't be the thing we focus on?
Because as you get further out from treasuries, as you go down the credit curve, this Fed umbrella, okay, it no longer covers you. Internal resilience matter. So let me take an example. If an emerging economy gets into trouble and cannot pay, the Fed will not buy their bonds. So the investors will not have a buyer of last resort. They will get rescheduled or they'll get defaulted on. So the argument makes sense if you're under the umbrella. If the government or if the Fed or the ECB buys those bonds, it doesn't make sense. So all the other assets outside the umbrella that have benefited from the spillover effects of what has happened under the umbrella, that's where the risk is drawn. And it ultimately depends on whether you believe the global economy is coming back in a V-shaped manner, or like me, you worry that it's more like a square root, that we're going to flatten out at a level that's insufficient, unfortunately, to avoid bankruptcies.
Mohammed, always great to catch up with you. Been a good friend to this program. Always a deep thinker. Mohammed Al-Arian there, the president of Queen's College, Cambridge. Coming up on this program, Hugh Hendry, the founder of Hugh Hendry Official, will join us very shortly. A series of brilliant interviews this Friday. Congratulations to my team putting them together. Hugh Hendry's coming up next on Bloomberg.
see coming. Some things you don't. The trick is to be ready for anything. John from Infrastructure Support is working every day to keep essential market data flowing seamlessly. We keep on
Jacinda Ardern's Labour Party holding 64 seats in the 120-seat parliament. Now, that is interesting because it's the first time since the introduction of proportional representation in 1996 that any party has won enough seats to govern on its own. Now, this is by turns rather luxurious and also slightly terrifying for the new Labour government because there are no checks and balances on power. There is no upper house. Jacinda Ardern can pretty much rule as she sees fit. So she did rule out, heading into this election, any capital gains tax, but as revenue collapses, it must be very tempting to give that policy another look. She's also contemplating going into coalition with the Greens Party, even though she doesn't actually need them to govern. Now, the Greens Party did take forward a more comprehensive package of tax reforms to this election, so were she to govern in concert with the Greens, they could do much of the heavy lifting on tax reform, which may also prove to be a little unpopular with some portions of the electorate. So it's going to be very interesting to watch this new term. There's going to be a lot of new and untested MPs in the caucus. So a second Jacinda Ardern term is going to be full of all sorts of different challenges to the ones that characterized the first.
The ball's not moving much right now. I mean, the two sides are still talking. The clock is ticking, as you know. It'd be very difficult. Even if you had a deal the next few days, I don't want to predict anything. I'm just saying there's more agreement than there was a while back. There are still policy disagreements.
I think you can read between the lines with that interview that took place about 40 minutes ago. Our special thanks to Larry Kudlow, National Economic Council Director, saying stimulus talks are still being held up by policy disagreements. Our final interview of this hour, I've been looking forward to this. I always say one of the deepest thinkers I know, Hugh Hendry, joins us right now. Hugh, fantastic to catch up with you, sir. I remember once upon a time you laying into someone and calling them so consensus. And I just get the feeling, and everyone gets the feeling when they watch programs like this, that everything just feels so consensus right now. Is that what it feels like to you, Hugh?
This market isn't red. This market is beige. But Joe, I want to say, first of all, I want to say thank you, John. I think the last time I was on, I was suffering from dengue fever. I was a little bit mad, but Leslie, I think that the comforting thing about today is that the ideologues are to be found managing or advising other people's money, and we've taken a lot of zealotry out of central banking, and I think that makes the world just a little bit safer. But you're just listening to your introduction there. When the fate of the market hangs upon the decision of bureaucrats, most likely to repeat another policy, the policy of fiscal stimulus, and here we are no more than 6 months since the last one. When you start to repeat policy, it is an indication that that policy is not working. So I would say to the markets, stay beige, because this is kind of boring.
So do you stick with what's working then, Hugh? And sometimes how difficult is it to do that?
I'm writing a book on that, the contrarian trend following system. And we're in one of those eras today where, everyone has a bad word to say about treasuries, about valuation. The language is normative. The direction is upwards. We are, I want to say sadly, but we can be kind of factual. Policy is too tight. It's remarkable. Monetary policy is too tight, and up until this dreadful virus, fiscal policy just really wasn't there. And so we have inverted policy rates, as you know, by the Fed are on the floor at 0. But, you know, negative rates out to a kind of 7-year duration are minus 100 basis points. So, yes, I'm cheating. I'm comparing nominal with real. But that's how it feels to me. And so every year, the economy just doesn't attain the very high expectations that we once had for it. And we're enduring a mild depression. And I think that D word is just going to last with us longer until we address this policy failure. Policy's too tight.
Well, that's the conversation I've had over the last 45 minutes or so. It feels like a freight train towards lower trend growth. And when you say policy's too tight, Hugh, people are going to be screaming at the screen, saying, what on earth is Hugh Hendry talking about? Policy is too tight. How do you make it looser?
Okay. Well, first of all, what I'm talking about, and the great challenge of our time for central banks, is fear. Fear stalks markets. Fear is ever present. You know, the comments from your previous guest, Mohammed, about Apple. Apple is, we've actually, Apple, let's take one step back, actually. We've learned a great deal over the last 12 months. If you can identify a business whose profits are basically flat, or will be flat for this calendar year, you found a business which is almost riskless. And in this environment, a rational market is attributing a value in perpetuity. It's saying if it's riskless, then it's priceless. So there's literally no upside constraint for the likes of the Apples in this world. But if you're actually holding and exposed to something which has economic risk, the market is so terrified. Then in some instances, you're buying these stocks at prices that last prevailed 20, 25 years ago. So it is actually it's a digital market. It's a market where where the market is fearless about businesses which are deemed to be riskless. And so that takes you again into an environment where 10-year rates are 60 basis points. Let me tell you why they're, well, today, of course, they backed up, as the market anticipates the election and a possible additional fiscal policy. But, I'm going to stop, John. Ask me. Stop me.
Go on. Just say what you want to say.
No.
I know there's something there.
No. Yeah,
Okay.
So, okay.
Go on.
Go. I
know it's there.
Calls.
Just say what you want to say. Just say what you want to say.
No. Yeah, so you know that all the experts tell us that we can't have negative rates, how it's bad for the banking system. Having no margin, having no spread is bad for banking profitability. We need profitable banks. But the problem with this, what I was going to say to you was that the reason why I talk about a market which is rational is we have essentially, the Federal Reserve has printed these banking reserves of $7 or so trillion, and it has given them to the bank. It's given a blank check and it said, "Hey, lend the money," and the banks are saying, "No, we don't want to. We're really, really afraid." And these rates and these reserves you're giving us, it ain't going to change. And if they have another fiscal stimulus, which is all about kind of promising to build bridges to nowhere, which they never actually do, if it doesn't evolve into a big, if they do fiscal stimulus, they have to give all of the money in terms of helicopter money. They have to give it as a check to ordinary households and just apologize that they've been kind of absent from their monetary and fiscal duties for the last 12 years and therefore allowed this depression to prevail. We're in an environment.
Well, you've made the argument that they should be reckless and they're not being reckless. You've made that argument on this program several months back. In your voice, I can hear a man that wants to get back into this business. And I just wonder whether we can get you back at some time soon. And if you had that contrarian, unappreciated, asymmetric risk, that trade out there that you think could just pay off huge to the upside with limited downside that people just aren't seeing right now, Hugh, what is it and where is it?
Oh, it doesn't. I mean, that doesn't exist. It's fantasy to believe that exists today, and like remarkably very, very small probabilities would be associated with anything that would have that profile. I believe, but this is a time, and there are times. This is a time, like I say, there is a cycle, and it lasts 50 or 60 years, and it's a cycle for society between order and chaos. The last 50 years, we have enjoyed the fruits of order re-emerging. We pushed back fascism. We changed cultures. We demonstrated a way to enrich a way for innovation, for prosperity. Like positive things happened and we're rewarded. And I'm afraid we're at that tipping point, with COVID and everything else, and with all of the, there's this fascism in behavior today, and that's chaotic. And this is the challenge of central banks. This is why it is actually, it's so hard for them to credibly proclaim that they're responsible. I wish they were. The Federal Reserve at Jackson Hole said, hey, we've got a big surprise. We've been working. We're radically going to shake up how we do things. And they came out with a policy which the Japanese introduced 7 years ago and has not worked. It's like,
so
really, we need
final
courage.
Question. In the 25 seconds I have left with you, are you saying that the United States is about to go the same way as Europe, as Japan?
Well, of course, and which is why 10-year Chinese rates, which is going to do the same, are kind of interesting. They yield 3.2%, and the currency, if anything, is likely to rally by 20% vis-a-vis the dollar. So yeah, there you go, 25 seconds.
Hugh Hendry, great to catch up. Hugh, come back soon. I really want to talk to you about the psychology of being an investor, because I think a lot of people are struggling right now, understanding whether to hold back or step back in or become married to the move that they made 6 months ago. Hugh Hendry there. What a lineup of guests in the last 60 minutes. Thank you very much for choosing Bloomberg. From London and New York this morning, good morning. This was the Countdown to the Open. Catch me on Twitter at FeroTV. This is Bloomberg.
This is Bloomberg Best, your weekly review of the most important business news, analysis, and interviews from Bloomberg Television around the world.
Ken Burns, welcome to Bloomberg Big Decisions.
We have always been a mixture of things. We are always stronger for that mixture.
Growth is a way to stay competitive, delight more and more consumers.
Welcome to the Best of Bloomberg Technology. I'm Emily Chang.
They've moved the needle by acknowledging that they have to monitor the content.
What is one word of advice you'll take with you?
Learn how to listen. And that is certainly something that has served me well.
Ankiti, where do you go from here?
It's a huge market. It's a huge opportunity. I want to go 100x from here.
Our philosophy is to partner where we can and stand apart when we should.
The Boston Symphony Orchestra presents BSO at Home. While you stay inside, enjoy a curated collection of archived concerts and behind-the-scenes stories from BSO musicians. BSO Homeschool provides lessons for music lovers of all ages. New performances and messages from musicians are added regularly. Enjoy these selections and much more at bso.org/at-home.
Months after Hurricane Maria, Puerto Rico is still in peril. Huge swaths of the island are still without power, running water, or access to medical care. experts estimate that it will take years before these services are restored island-wide. Much of the blame has been placed on FEMA for a slow response in comparison to recent disasters on the mainland. But recovery from a disaster of this complexity and scale has proven more challenging than anyone anticipated. And filling the gaps between an overextended public sector and a suffering populace falls on the private citizens. Robert Anderson is a Puerto Rico resident of 4 years.
The eye of the storm came in south of El Yunque, swept up towards San Juan, and out to Arecibo. Everything on the right-hand side is what we call the dirty side of the storm.
This isn't his first time in a disaster zone. With a military and telecom background, Anderson worked on repairing damaged cell phone towers in New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina. Some might be tempted to label him a disaster capitalist, seeking lucrative government contracts for his expertise. But as Anderson finds himself in the middle of a humanitarian crisis, he and his associates are developing a variety of pro bono recovery projects that target the island's hardest hit areas.
I see two Puerto Ricos. We're here in San Juan. They have telecommunications restored. They may or may not have power, but basic services are in place. They're able to get food. They're able to buy things. They're surviving. And when you look outside of the San Juan area, you can go 15 minutes from here and find areas that are devastated. I'm working on the devastated side.
Today, he's put together a boots-on-the-ground mission to provide medical care to some of the island's most isolated and vulnerable residents. Steve Berenbaum is one of Anderson's business associates. He offered an extra car and a set of hands.
So we received an initial report from a nurse that was out in the area. We're headed to the northeast region of Utuado for some people that are in need of urgent medical assistance.
Dr. Sally Priester is a physician from San Juan. She filled a van with medical supplies at her own expense and brought along a team of nurses. Google Maps estimated our first destination to be a 90-minute drive. But it didn't account for obstacles like this. Our first stop was the home of an 82-year-old blind Vietnam veteran. His roof was blown off by the storm, and he's been living alone in a back shed for nearly 2 months.
His cane actually got broken in the storm, so he's limited mobility. He has a number of medical ailments. Dr. Priester's having a look at him. We called the VA. They're going to get him set up with what he needs, get him stabilized so he can then be transported either to an evacuation center or off the island. It's when the chain gets broken, when those families that are connected to them leave the island or take off. These guys get left at the end of the road, and it's tough.
FEMA was not officially part of Robert's team, and their arrival caught everyone by surprise. Their job here was to survey and report back to their superiors, and did not come with medical aid of any kind.
People think that FEMA is there to hand out bottles of water. It's not what they do. FEMA has a role to play. They have a very specific role. They bring in ships, they bring in airplanes, they bring in tractor trailers with pallets of things. But they're a big machine, and there's gaps in that thing. And you're seeing one of the gaps here, and we help fill that role. These guys are in a bad situation before, and now they're struggling for real basic things. One of the risks that you run is people going from fear to hopelessness. Those are the folks that we're trying to reach.
And how are they reached? How are they even found?
Word of mouth, mostly.
And what's your role in all this?
Ghost in the machine. I'm lucky enough to be able to communicate with folks in FEMA, the state of Puerto Rico.
For a ghost, Robert makes his presence well known. Not only was he the de facto leader of the mission, now with FEMA in tow, he created his own maps to survey storm damage.
So we're right here.
And delivered them to FEMA HQ free of charge.
I have pretty good reach.
Perhaps that's how he managed to earn himself a coveted FEMA badge without actually working for them. And it's these relationships that allow him to operate more efficiently than an NGO or a government agency.
We're able to resolve problems at a different level.
Our next stop was on a mountaintop, a family of 11 struggling to care for their special needs brother in what was left of their house.
Probably we are the first a health team to come and visit this family.
Muy bien, todo muy bien.
The patient has Down syndrome. He is all day in bed. The difficulty with this is the patient cannot be alone. The most important thing is that you need to take care of the chronic disease besides disability, because they have been not going to a doctor, and no doctor has coming here yet.
So we need a refill of this medication.
After maybe 54 days, it's not getting better. And the only way that you can be able to see that is coming to the ground, drive, and see the people and talk to the people.
You can see San Juan from here, but you can't get there. It's like the Emerald City.
On this stop, we caught word that a man living alone at the edge of the jungle was in need of care.
So we decided to take a little detour, come up here and check out and see what's going on. One of the challenges is to find those people that are at the end of these roads that need help.
¿Pero por qué estás solo? ¿Por qué estás por acá tan solo? I'm asking about why he's alone right here. He said things of life happens. Yeah, I'm here by myself. So ¿dónde vive acá? En la parte de This is not a job. To do this, you need to have passion for what you can do. You're not going to get paid.
It's said in disaster response and emergency response that the real first responders are your neighbors. You don't need to wait for a lucrative FEMA contract to go out and do good and to help the community.
In the end, do you feel like you're making a difference?
Lives you touch and people that you can affect. I don't really think about it in those terms.
But why do you do it?
It helps me sleep at night. I think it's as much for the people that are going out to help and do things as it is for the people that you affect.
Whether out of altruism, or the lure of a paid gig, or some mixture of the two, Anderson hopes to stay here to help shape Puerto Rico's future.
Puerto Rico's essentially been a colony for 400 years. It was treated poorly by the Spanish. It was not treated well by the United States when they first got here. Puerto Rico can continue in the way that it's always been, or Puerto Rico can rebuild itself like nothing that's ever been. And we have to do everything we can to make that real. That's the bottom line.
When I met him first online, I found him to be really sweet. I think I was the one who was talking for an hour. He was just listening.
When we met, I saw her. She was beautiful, intelligent, and kind, which was, something that I was looking for.
Anshu and Sumit are one of about 12 million couples that get married in India every year. Unlike their parents' generation, they're not from two close villages, but from two cities on opposite sides of the country. And their love didn't start through community matchmaking, marriage brokers, or classified ads in newspapers, but began online.
So we met through jeevansathi.com. So it's basically an online portal where we have detailed profile of different grooms and brides.
It makes a lot of remote profiles who are located in distant areas more accessible.
Thanks to growing internet and smartphone usage, matrimony websites and apps in India are starting to disrupt the matchmaking industry. More and more people are finding their partners at the click of a mouse. jeevansathi.com, where Anshu and Sumit met, is one of the biggest players. Young Indians looking for love set up profiles including their caste and horoscope, but their criteria for choosing spouses appears to be changing.
We have seen the shift from traditional caste community conservative parameters to something like which is more focused on education, employment.
Anshu and Sumit's marriage was initiated by their parents, but modern Indian couples like them have more input than previous generations.
We looked up to them to agree for the proposal, but it was primarily our decision that we wanted to be with each other.
So what's the emoji you use the most to send to each other?
So there's a bear, which basically we use for indicating a hug.
Yeah, that's our language basically. Bear icon for a hug.
Time flies when you're in love, and just 1.5 months after they first met online, the couple got engaged. They decided to hold their wedding less than 3 months later. But planning a traditional Hindu wedding on such short notice is no easy task. The massive event usually lasts 3 days, has various ceremonies and celebrations, and involves the entire two families and hundreds of guests. Luckily, there are websites and apps for that.
We searched online, we got in touch with Wedding Brigade, and they helped us finalize the venue. And it makes the search faster and efficient.
Startups like the Wedding Brigade are challenging traditional wedding planners in this $50 billion industry. It provides various services from booking banquet venues to buying wedding gowns. The website makes money by charging commission from vendors.
People don't want to be limited to what is available around them. They want to know the entire range of options available before making a decision. And now it's easy to find almost everything on one portal.
Anshu and Sumit are officially married in a ritual that has gone on for thousands of years, but their love started in a very new way. Technologies might be changing the way couples meet, date, and get married in India, but they're definitely not changing everything.
The technology was only the first level help that we could get to find each other. Everything else was like very humanly and emotions and feelings there.
Massachusetts Senator Elizabeth Warren has become a symbol of everything the Republican Party stands against.
Everyone gets a right to basic health care. We need strong oversight of these banks.
A legal scholar and a consumer advocate turned politician, Warren has branded herself as a champion of the working class and made a career out of standing up to big business. While rumors of a 2020 presidency bid remain just that,
I'm not running for president.
her Senate seat is up for re-election in 2018, and Republicans are already pumping millions into super PACs to defeat her. This is the story of how a law professor and politician came to be seen as the biggest threat to Republican values and the greatest hope for progressive America. Elizabeth Warren was born Elizabeth Ann Herron, the youngest of 3 siblings, on June 22, 1949, in Oklahoma City to middle-class parents. After waiting tables to help her family pay the bills, Warren became a star on the high school debate team. She landed a scholarship to George Washington University at the age of 16, but 2 years later dropped out to marry her high school sweetheart, Jim Warren. By 1980, Warren was a mother of 2, divorced and remarried, had earned a bachelor's degree from the University of Houston, a juris degree from Rutgers, and practicing law in New Jersey. Warren then went on to become an influential law professor, teaching, lecturing, and publishing highly cited work on bankruptcy and commercial law at 7 universities around the country, eventually settling at Harvard Law School. But Warren wasn't always a liberal lion.
Elizabeth Warren used to be a Republican, actually.
That's Stephen Dennis.
I'm a Senate reporter for Bloomberg. Around the time that Elizabeth Warren switched parties, she became a fierce opponent of a Republican drive to make it much harder to file for bankruptcy. She fought that for a decade. It ended up passing anyways.
While her efforts ultimately failed, her warning calls were heard in 2008.
We're in the midst of a serious financial crisis. Our entire economy is in danger, and without immediate action by Congress, America could slip into a financial panic, and a distressing scenario would unfold.
Professor Warren was tapped to help with oversight in the government bailout.
She would excoriate bankers and their bonuses and their practices.
Why should the U.S. taxpayer alone carry city?
She proposed a series of tough regulations, which became the basis for much of the Dodd-Frank financial law that we have today. That sort of catapulted her to national stardom, particularly among the progressive left.
Encouraged by her newfound notoriety, Warren declared her bid for the U.S. Senate on September 14, 2011. During the race, her opponent Scott Brown tried to derail Warren by accusing her of falsely claiming Native American heritage, a controversy that earned her the nickname Pocahontas. Nevertheless, she was victorious and won the Senate seat by a comfortable margin. She used her new tenure to challenge everyone, from banking regulators and Treasury officials to members of Wall Street and Congress.
I'm really concerned that too big to fail has become too big for trial. We need tough new laws to hold corporate executives personally accountable. No one should be above the law.
She called for Wells Fargo CEO John Stumpf to resign for fraud, introduced the Bank on Student Loans Fairness Act, and reintroduced the 21st Century Glass-Steagall Act. In 2016, after staying silent during the Democratic primary battle, Warren finally endorsed Hillary Clinton and had some harsh words for candidate Trump.
Donald Trump is a loud, nasty, thin-skinned fraud who has never risked anything for anyone, and that is just one of the many reasons he will never be president of the United States.
But she was wrong.
The forgotten men and women of our country will be forgotten no longer.
Warren wasted no time resisting Trump's agenda.
Have you ever managed or overseen a $1 trillion loan program?
I have not.
How about a $1 billion loan program?
I have not.
Okay.
In the Donald Trump era, Elizabeth Warren has been playing defense and trying to prevent Donald Trump and his cabinet appointees from rolling back protections that she helped enact.
Warren actually found herself rebuked by Mitch McConnell for reading a letter by Coretta Scott King about Jeff Sessions' record on racism during his confirmation.
She was warned. She was given an explanation. Nevertheless, she persisted.
That moment became something that's on T-shirts, bumper stickers, slogans, and that really galvanized a lot of support for her. It's been very hard for Republicans to get much of anything done this year, and that's at least in part to this resistance movement that Elizabeth Warren has helped champion.
We are here to fight back.
Enough of Elizabeth Warren. Like you,
millions of dollars are being funneled to defeat Warren in the midterm elections in 2018. But it's the rumors of a 2020 presidential bid that has further prompted powerful donors to fund her opposition, often using the same playbook of constant and ruthless ad campaigns that many believe helped Trump win in 2016. It's anyone's guess if she will endure what Hillary could not.
You know, the question for Elizabeth Warren is whether she can go from being a liberal firebrand to somebody who can regularly get 60 votes for initiatives in the Senate and 218 in the House and drive an agenda, and whether she can bring together coalitions for political victories. That's the challenge, and we'll see what happens.
Sadiq Khan, the mayor of London, has made some powerful opponents.
He doesn't know me, never met me, doesn't know what I'm all about. I think they're very rude statements, and frankly, tell him I will remember those statements.
My message to Donald Trump and his team is that, your views of Islam are ignorant.
He's the first Muslim mayor of a major Western capital and proud of it. This is how Sadiq Khan went from the son of Pakistani immigrants to a lawyer, lawmaker, and now the mayor of London. Khan's parents emigrated from Pakistan. His father was a bus driver, his mother a stay-at-home seamstress. The 10-strong Khan family squeezed into a 3-bedroom flat in South London. He wanted to be a dentist, but TV in the 1980s convinced him otherwise.
Objection!
LA law with its swagger and ill-fitting suits caught Khan's eye. He graduated in 1991 with a degree in law from North London University and joined a human rights firm. Khan worked a number of high-profile cases, often clashing with London's Metropolitan Police Force. But he had bigger political ambitions.
This is what being a new MP is like, squatting on a bench in the absence of an office, dealing with letters from constituents.
Reports are just coming in of an explosion here in London.
And there's just explosions, and then it was just smoke everywhere.
Everyone's just asking what's happened.
Only 2 months after Khan entered the Commons as a Member of Parliament, London was attacked by Islamist extremists.
That day will stay with me for the rest of my life.
He spoke out against the attacks both as a London MP and as a Muslim.
He has been very clear about his opposition to violence, opposition to terrorism, and has set out to make the case for a more open and peaceful Islam.
That's Thomas Penny, one of Bloomberg's Westminster correspondents.
Here is a man who is a Muslim, and he is standing up and being open and straightforward and being clear that the problem here is not Islam, but it's Islamic extremism.
In 2015, a decade after the attacks, Khan ran for mayor of London, and his faith was back in the headlines. His opponent, Zach Goldsmith, trying to link Khan to radical Islam.
The debate got again personal and nasty. The Goldsmith camp has called Khan extreme and accused him of associating with, quote, those who seek to do our police and capital harm.
It's a pattern of behaviour.
Even the former Prime Minister David Cameron repeated the allegations.
He shared a platform with Sajil Shahid, the man who trained the ringleader of the 7/7 attacks and accused the United States of bringing 9/11 on themselves.
But the smears didn't stick.
Zach Goldsmith ran a very negative campaign that was based on what people knew was a lie.
This election was not without controversy. And I'm so proud that London has today chosen hope over fear and unity over division.
After taking the mayor's office with a comfortable majority, Khan has brought a business-like efficiency to the role, scrapping expensive vanity projects like the Garden Bridge and the new Routemaster buses, which cost £350,000 each. The former lawyer who used to fight the police in court is now praised for his close relationship with them.
I was talking to a very senior police officer in the Metropolitan Police who said there was a sea change when he went into City Hall, and the police were saying how much they welcomed this because they knew where they stood and he was more straightforward to work with. So he works like a lawyer, he works like a government minister.
Khan's kept his faith at the fore. He's an outspoken voice for moderate Muslims across the world.
Donald J. Trump is calling for a total and complete shutdown of Muslims entering the United States.
Now, by giving the impression that Islam and the West are incompatible, you're playing into the hands of the extremists.
The ongoing spat between Khan and US President Donald Trump escalated when Trump went after Khan, misquoting him on Twitter just hours after the terrorist attacks of June 3rd, 2017. Khan's now one of the most prominent Labour politicians in the UK. In fact, a recent poll of Londoners found Khan was more trusted to keep the country safe from terrorism than the Prime Minister or the Labour leader. His story of going from the son of an immigrant bus driver to the mayor of one of the greatest cities in the world plays well with Londoners. But can he appeal to the rest of the nation? Has Khan got his eye on the top job? And is the UK ready for a Muslim Prime Minister?
What does it take to change the world? A big army? A cure to a pandemic? A revolution? All of these take either a lot of people, thousands of hours, or massive amounts of space. But for Julian Assange, all he needs is one room, an internet connection, and the world will listen. Assange is located here, and more specifically, right here. And from that location, he's posted government secrets, classified documents, and leaked emails from some of the world's most powerful people. And in doing so, has been labeled a hero, a villain, a nihilist, and everything in between. This is how an Australian programmer sequestered in the Ecuadorian embassy in London became one of the most influential and notorious people in the world. Born in 1971 in Townsville, Australia, Assange has always been on the move. Living in over 30 homes by the time he was in his mid-teens, Assange, along with his mother and half-brother, finally settled down in Melbourne. His introduction to hacking started at 16 when he was given a Commodore 64, which he attached to a modem. He attended the University of Melbourne, where he studied programming, physics, and mathematics. He never graduated, but that doesn't mean he didn't get an education. By 1991, Assange hacked into the Pentagon, U.S. Navy, and other branches of the U.S. government. In 1996, he was caught by the Australian Federal Police and charged with over 30 counts of hacking and computer-related crimes. He didn't get any jail time, but he was fined $2,100.
I think the first taste of what would come later was the hacking that he did as a young programmer, and that really sort of foreshadowed a healthy skepticism of the use and abuse of technology by governments.
That's Vernon Silver.
I'm a reporter for Bloomberg's investigations team.
Assange's youth as a hacker laid the foundation for him to start WikiLeaks in 2006. But what is WikiLeaks? It's a website that posts unfiltered, usually classified documents. What separates it from every other media outlet is that they have no editorial hierarchy. With a publication like the New York Times, information comes in, they take that information, package it, then disseminate it for the public to see. WikiLeaks, however, cuts out the middleman.
WikiLeaks gathers information, most of it given to them anonymously. So what they're doing is really very simple. They get the information in one end from who gives it to them and out the other with sometimes minimal interference. Julian Assange is the leader of that, the mastermind, the creator, and really, because he thinks of it as a journalistic enterprise, the editor-in-chief.
But every story starts with a source, and Assange has some unconventional sources.
Julian Assange does not hack as far as we know. He is the recipient of people who are either insiders who give him secret documents or hacked emails from a foreign power.
That's Eli Lake.
I am a columnist for Bloomberg.
And there was no source bigger for Assange than Chelsea Manning. He used to be known as U.S. soldier Bradley Manning. In 2010, Manning provided Assange and WikiLeaks with hundreds of thousands of leaked government documents. WikiLeaks quietly began releasing the documents in February of 2010, then made big headlines in April by posting what is now known as the Collateral Murder Video.
Come on, fire!
It was a vivid, graphic video. It changed the debate on the Iraq War, and importantly, it put WikiLeaks on the map when they put it online, and they couldn't be ignored at that point.
And those leaks were just the beginning. They went on to post more than 90,000 leaked documents known as the Afghan War Logs, 390,000 documents known as the Iraq War Logs, and 250,000 private messages between diplomats called cables in what is now known as Cablegate. These leaks were met with very real ethical questions.
The problem with publishing those cables was that a number of confidential sources for U.S. diplomats who faced real danger when their names were exposed.
Then Secretary of State Hillary Clinton drove the point home that
every country, including the United States, must be able to have candid conversations about the people and nations with whom they deal.
Shortly after Cablegate, the Swedish government issued an arrest warrant for Assange on allegations of rape and molestation. He claimed the allegations were fabricated to get him extradited to the United States, a claim the U.S. government denied. Either way, Assange's next move was
to seek refuge in the Ecuadorian embassy, which really was the beginning of the new chapter in his life and what we're dealing with now, which is him being stuck in London.
What was supposed to be an office in an embassy is now Assange's self-imposed prison to this very day. But that doesn't mean he's slowed down. Since being trapped in the embassy, WikiLeaks has released files about Guantanamo Bay prisoners, Syrian political figures, and the draft to the Trans-Pacific Partnership. And then came the 2016 U.S. election.
Thousands of leaked emails show Democratic Party officials possibly plotting against Bernie Sanders in his race against Hillary Clinton.
Over the course of 68 days, WikiLeaks released 20,000 confidential Democratic National Committee emails. In terms of the presidential race, if you look right here, when Assange released the first batch of emails, Trump actually takes his first lead against Clinton.
I think we've had enough of the Clintons in all fairness.
Once WikiLeaks started exposing secrets of the Democratic Party, Julian Assange became a hero to many on the right. Public opinion kind of flip-flopped.
WikiLeaks.
From the emails, we now know Hillary Clinton's campaign manager makes risotto, and also how the DNC squashed Bernie Sanders' campaign. One thing we don't know is who gave Assange the stolen emails in the first place.
Many leading Democrats say they suspect it was the Russians. They released an analysis from a private cybersecurity firm that had said it was the Russians.
But Assange claims
our source is not the Russian government, and it is not a state party.
So this is where we stand today. The public still doesn't know who provided the emails to WikiLeaks. Meanwhile, Assange is still running WikiLeaks and still releasing documents. In March 2017, he started publishing documents from the CIA's Center for Cyber Intelligence called Vault 7.
The CIA, the agency charged with finding and keeping our top secrets, can't keep its own secrets.
As long as Assange has a connection to the world, no government secret will be too far from exposure.
Julian Assange is still in the embassy. Maybe he'll leave, maybe he won't. Kind of regardless, his work has been done. He's changed the way people think about their governments, about their own secrets, about their own hackability, and really the world has changed because of him.
When it debuted, the 4G wireless we have today allowed people for the first time to hit the road and explore unknown places with only a smartphone for directions. When 5G arrives, it could enable driverless cars to take us there as well. 5G stands for 5th generation mobile networks or wireless systems. It's insanely fast and can accommodate a lot more connected devices. But the reason it's being called revolutionary is because 5G will allow connected devices to speak to each other as well as people.
Right now we're living in a world where really it's a one-way experience.
That's Bloomberg tech reporter Ian King.
The network talks to your phone, you look at your phone and access data, then you send something back to the network. What we're being told about 5G is that really for the first time we're going to see machines communicating with each other over mobile networks in a meaningful way.
5G could end up being 100 times faster than what we have now, with speeds that could reach 20 gigabits per second. In plain English, that means downloading a full-length HD movie in seconds. 5G will also increase total bandwidth, which we will need in order to accommodate the growing Internet of Things. We're talking about the class of devices like internet-connected refrigerators, thermostats, dog collars, but 5G will enable many, many more.
Things like your utility network, factories, where machines are just sat there not connected at all. Suddenly they're all going to be connected. Suddenly we're going to be able to have real-time monitoring. Other things utility poles like your light, the light poles.
But perhaps the biggest advance will be a huge reduction in communication lag time, known as latency. A network of driverless cars will need the speed of 5G to ping each other multiple times per second to avoid collisions. Near instantaneous data transfers could allow doctors to perform surgery remotely with a robotic scalpel. So how will all this work? First, you need to improve network density.
And that's just a fancy word for saying you put more towers out there. What we're being told is that's not actually the case with 5G.
The idea is 5G will not only use the existing mobile spectrum, but also tap into higher frequencies called millimeter waves. Millimeter waves can carry more data, but only travel short distances. This may mean you'll see a lot more of these base stations around town. And the new towers may have as many as 100 antenna ports, compared to about a dozen on 4G cell towers. So when will we get 5G? Getting 5G ready is expected to cost providers $275 billion over 7 years in the US alone. Look for the first 5G service to pop up in big cities sometime in 2019.
People think of Vladimir Putin, they think of capital P, power. And that's exactly the impression he creates. Whether it's physical power, firing different weapons, riding in various James Bond-esque modes of transportation, or tossing hapless opponents in judo. Or political power, ruling his own country with an iron fist, crushing his political opposition, or, most recently, being accused of meddling in foreign elections for his own benefit. This is how Vladimir Putin went from a poor, tough kid in Leningrad to a KGB spy to the very symbol of modern Russia. Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin was born in 1952 in Leningrad, which is now St. Petersburg. His father was a factory foreman and his mother a homemaker. It is widely said that Putin's public-facing tough guy persona can be traced back to him getting into fights when he was younger, which paved the way for him to take up judo. After getting a law degree from Leningrad State University, Putin joined the KGB Foreign Intelligence Service. He spent 16 years in the KGB. When Putin returned to Russia, he began his political career.
He went to work for Anatoly Sobchak, who was then the mayor of St. Petersburg.
That's Leonid Bershidsky.
I'm a columnist at Bloomberg View.
Putin thrived in Sobchak's administration because
he was sort of considered pretty efficient city official at that time. He was very loyal to Sobchak.
So loyal and efficient that
he was noticed by Yeltsin's close circle.
And those people soon brought Putin over to Moscow to work in Yeltsin's administration, where he quickly climbed the political ladder.
Then, of course, he was promoted to Prime Minister of Russia.
That's Dmitry Trenin.
I am currently director of the Carnegie Moscow Center.
Around this time, Yeltsin and the people around him, the so-called family, decided that Putin would become Yeltsin's successor. And then this happened. The apartment bombings were carried out in 3 Russian cities, killing 293 people and injuring more than 1,000. Putin immediately accused Chechen separatists for the bombings and followed it up with action.
He was credited with having a very successful military campaign against the terrorists.
And it worked.
After that, he became an heir apparent in the eyes of the Russian people.
3 months later, Yeltsin resigned. And on his way out, a famous exchange.
He was getting into the car in the Kremlin, and the last words that he addressed to Putin before getting into his car was, "Take good care of Russia."
So Putin took over as president, and 3 months after that, won his first election. But just because Putin won the presidency, that didn't mean he had all the power. This is Michael McFall.
I was U.S. ambassador from 2012 to 2014. In the 1990s, there was a fire sale of all the things worth owning in Russia, and certain people,
the oligarchs,
did better than others in that fire sale, sometimes called privatization, and those people tended to be well connected with the Yeltsin regime, and they weren't Putin's friends. But they probably miscalculated, thinking that they could easily find a way to influence him. It became impossible almost from the start. From that very moment, there was warfare between him and the oligarchs.
That's when Putin gave the oligarchs a choice. Putin's way?
Some of those people from the 90s managed to figure out a new way of dealing with Putin and have survived.
Or prison.
Others could not find common vision, and so they lost their assets.
Khodorkovsky once was Russia's richest person, worth $15 billion, but he ran afoul of President Vladimir Putin and spent a decade in prison.
With domestic power consolidated, Putin focused on restoring Russia's global influence.
Putin is the guy who believes in the expansionist Russian state. Georgia and Ukraine and all the other Soviet republics that split off when the Soviet Union fell apart, he still believes that they're traditional Russian satellites. A lot of his strategy is about keeping them in the orbit. That Yeltsin line, take good care of Russia, that's how he understands it.
And he used annexation and invasion, as well as oil, gas, and trade to keep former Soviet republics in Russia's orbit. In 2008, Putin's 2 terms were up, and he decided to step down as president. Dmitry Medvedev stepped in as president, and Putin went back to prime minister. But really,
Putin never left power. He pretty much continued running the country, and Medvedev was a bit of a figurehead.
There was actually a period of cooperation between Russia and the U.S. that benefited both countries during Medvedev's presidency.
Because Medvedev did not have the same negative attitude towards the West as Putin did.
But when Putin came back to run for a 3rd term, in the lead up to the 2012 election, it was widely believed that both the presidential and parliamentary elections were rigged, and Russians took to the streets. Putin blamed the protests squarely on America, and more specifically, Secretary of State Hillary Clinton.
He believed that she had sent, and this is his words, a signal to demonstrators.
Still, Putin won by a huge margin and set about crushing the protest movement immediately upon his return to the Kremlin. Over the next few years, Russia's economy tumbled. Putin annexed Crimea, leading to sanctions. The price of oil fell drastically. The ruble hit a new low, and America played down Russia's influence, with Obama calling Russia a regional power. Despite all of that, Putin's approval rating remained sky high, and then an opportunity for payback.
I think I'd get along very well with Vladimir Putin.
In 2016, there was one candidate who called Vladimir Putin very smart.
Trump exhibited tolerance towards Putin's actions annexing Crimea, and similar views on NATO and sanctions.
Secretary Clinton didn't support any of those views.
Even though Putin denies any wrongdoing,
U.S. elections.
Yes.
The U.S. has accused Russia of being behind the leaking of 20,000 Democratic National Committee emails, which many say helped Trump beat Hillary Clinton in the presidential election. Which leaves us here, with the possibility of a President Putin until 2024, positioning Russia to be the world power he always imagined it should be.
Jack Ma is Asia's richest man and most recognizable business tycoon. He's the chairman of Alibaba, China's e-commerce giant and one of the 10 largest companies in the world. Yet he still wants more.
We know where we're going. We want to be the 5th largest economy.
Big words from the man some call Asia's Jeff Bezos. He's confident, he's charismatic, and he's definitely not the average CEO. This is how a poor school teacher went from the classroom to being one of the most influential multi-billionaires in the world. Ma was born in China's southeastern city Hangzhou in 1964. His parents were traditional musician storytellers. As a teenager, he started to learn English from foreign tourists after China opened up in the late 1970s.
And then for 9 years, Jack Ma hung around outside the Hangzhou Hotel, which is now called the Shangri-La. He would get up at 5 a.m. to talk to travelers.
That's Bloomberg technology reporter Lulu Chen.
And I cover China Internet for Bloomberg.
Ma failed China's National University entrance exam twice before being admitted to local teachers' college. He graduated in 1988. He applied for 30 jobs and got rejected, including from the fast food giant KFC.
When KFC came to China, come to us say, 24 people went for the job. 23 people accepted. I was the only one guy.
Then Ma got a job at a local university and taught English there for about 5 years, earning just $15 a month. On the side, he started a translation company with several friends. During a company trip to the US in 1995, Ma had his first encounter with the internet at a friend's place in Seattle.
I searched the first word, beer. I don't know why, because it's easy to spell, baby. And I see beers from Germany, beers from USA, beers from Japan, but there's no beer from China.
So he searched for the word China instead and still couldn't find anything. And that got him thinking. He wanted to build something that would put China on the world's map.
He started China Pages, a Yellow Pages-like website, but it didn't take off. Then Ma joined a government agency in Beijing to help set up a website. By 1999, the internet stock boom had gripped Wall Street. And back in his Hangzhou apartment, Ma decided to try again. With his wife and a group of friends, Ma raised $80,000 and set up Alibaba, a site that allowed businesses to sell stuff to each other.
人家美国人强就强它的硬件，强就强它的系统建设，这方面确实比你早。但是玩信息玩软的，中国人的脑袋绝不比你们长。我们在座的所有人的脑袋绝不比你们长。
By 2000, Alibaba had raised $25 million from investors, including Goldman Sachs and SoftBank.
He had no business plan and zero revenue, but his eyes was very strong eyes.
In 2003, Alibaba started Taobao, a platform for individual sellers to trade with each other, and publicly declared war against eBay, who had started to make a foray into China.
Jack Ma has this famous saying that Alibaba is a crocodile in the Yangtze River, whereas eBay is a shark in the ocean. And if they fight eBay in the ocean, then they'll lose. But if they fight them in the Yangtze River, then they have a home base advantage.
In 2007, just 1 year after it forced eBay out of China, Alibaba debuted its business-facing division on the Hong Kong Stock Exchange. But it delisted 5 years later as its performance sagged. But in 2014, Alibaba raised $25 billion in the world's biggest IPO in New York.
Everybody should have a dream. What if that dream comes true?
After achieving dominance in the business of e-commerce in China, Alibaba has been building an internet empire worth $472 billion, with businesses in cloud computing, online video streaming, movie production, healthcare, sports, retail, and even news media.
Alibaba buying into South China Morning Post really raised eyebrows. This is the largest English newspaper in Hong Kong, and it shows that Jack Ma's ambitions weren't limited to e-commerce. He wanted to influence not just Chinese users, but also overseas users as well.
The US has criticized Alibaba for allowing companies to sell counterfeit and poorly made goods, but in China, it enjoys the favor of China's government. It's part of Ma's company philosophy.
In love with the government, but don't marry with them.
Jack Ma's an extremely fortunate man for jumping on the internet sector so early. Note that this is a person who has no coding skills at all. He's a natural showman and a gifted public speaker and really able to convince others to believe in his vision.
Ma's vision of growing Alibaba to be the world's 5th largest economy faces strong competition at home and abroad. It will require more than just naked ambition and charisma. But Ma is great at getting himself in the right place at the right time. So far, it's served him well.
Peter Thiel is a walking contradiction. He got his bachelor's and Juris Doctorate from Stanford, but speaks out about the horrors of higher education, saying college is
as corrupt as the Catholic Church was 500 years ago.
He's a staunch supporter of the free press, yet he bankrolled a lawsuit to bankrupt an independent media company.
But these were not journalists.
And most of all, he's an immigrant and libertarian who's the most public supporter of Donald Trump in all of Silicon Valley.
What Trump represents isn't crazy, and it's not going away.
This is the story of how an openly gay, immigrant genius, libertarian billionaire went from tech contrarian to Silicon Valley's biggest Trump supporter. Peter Thiel was born on October 11, 1967 in Frankfurt, West Germany, to Suzanne and Klaus Thiel. Peter's family emigrated to Cleveland, Ohio when he was 1. An Ayn Rand devotee during his youth, Thiel attended Stanford University majoring in philosophy.
His Stanford experience shaped a really big part of
who he decided to surround himself with.
That's Lizette Chapman.
And I cover technology and venture capital here at Bloomberg.
He and his Stanford friends made their first big splash in tech with PayPal. After selling to eBay for $1.5 billion, they would become known as the PayPal Mafia for each incredible success after PayPal. For Thiel, that began with an early, modest $500,000 investment in Facebook.
And in VC speak, early means big risk, but also big reward. He turned that initial $500,000 investment into more than $1 billion in cash.
But Thiel was just getting started with Facebook, and he went on to make a whole bunch of wildly successful investments.
From SpaceX to Airbnb to one of the largest, most powerful companies in the United States, if not the world, and of course that's Palantir.
The incredibly controversial secretive data mining startup he founded with his colleagues from PayPal. It connects data silos and then allows non-technical people to search that information for patterns. Data like
financial information, feeds from video cameras, biometric details, passport information, flight manifest.
Palantir doesn't talk much about how they collect this data, who has access to it, or what they do with it. But they have contracts with
the Department of Homeland Security and the CIA and the Department of Justice and the Securities and Exchange Commission
and several other federal agencies. It's the richest company you've never heard of, valued at $20 billion. But there are plenty of obscenely wealthy people in Silicon Valley. What makes him different...
He's a complex ball of multiple contradictions.
Take college, for example. Even though college was extremely important for Thiel, there's something called the Thiel Fellowship.
In exchange for dropping out and a promise not to pursue college, Thiel would give them $100,000 each.
You basically tell people that if you get a diploma, you're saved. Otherwise you go to hell. You go to Yale or you go to jail.
Also, his relationship with the press.
Here's another contradiction. He's donated to free press initiatives, including the Committee to Protect Journalists.
But he also secretly spent tens of millions of dollars bankrolling a lawsuit filed by Hulk Hogan over the publication of a sex tape and bankrupting the independently run Gawker Media. Why did he do this? Because in 2007, one of Gawker Media's blogs, ValueAg, outed him as gay. And with the lawsuit, he
found an opportunity to get back at them by funding the lawsuit that Hulk Hogan was able to bring then, but he wouldn't have been able to do that without Thiel's money.
And finally, Thiel's biggest contradiction, his endorsement of Donald Trump.
When he was asked about his support for Trump, he was surprised at the outrage that came with it from many of his colleagues in Silicon Valley. He didn't want more of the establishment.
No matter how crazy this election seems, it is less crazy than the condition of our country.
After briefly supporting Carly Fiorina in the primaries, Thiel pivoted to Trump, donating $1.25 million to Trump and his associated super PACs in October 2016. And he didn't just help Trump financially. He gave a full-throated keynote speech supporting Trump at the Republican National Convention.
I'm not a politician, but neither is Donald Trump. He is a builder, and it's time to rebuild America.
And when Trump was finally elected, Thiel was given the reins to an enormous amount of power.
And I want to thank you, man. You had a very special guy.
He was named the transitional advisor. And in that role, he did a lot of interviewing and a lot of vetting to fill hundreds of cabinet positions and different jobs within the administration.
But it turns out, Thiel's support isn't unconditional.
Talking to people who spend time with him, I have also heard that he is no longer a great supporter of Trump.
It was reported that Thiel was unhappy with the direction of Trump's presidency. Ever since, he's been mum, making no public appearances, no statements, and staying out of the spotlight altogether. Although there have been suggestions that Trump could tap Thiel for a top intelligence post or ambassadorship, there's no indication he'd accept.
He's described his relationship with politics as schizophrenic. He gets really involved, and then he runs away as fast as possible.
Whether Thiel takes a new position or simply continues as a board director at Facebook and Palantir, at just 50 years old, he's primed to wield some serious influence in technology and politics for decades to come.
2016 was again the hottest year on record, and the previous 17 years have seen our 16 most scorching. Scientists overwhelmingly agree. Global warming is the culprit. And it's just getting started. Ice caps, extreme weather, wildfires, droughts, and the hits keep coming. What are we doing about it? In 2015, the world took its boldest step yet to stem climate change with a historic accord in Paris. But now comes the hard part. Nations must change energy policies and invest huge amounts of money, and they will likely do it without the United States. President Donald Trump announced on June 1st that the U.S. would withdraw from the accord.
The reality is that withdrawing is in America's economic interest and won't matter much to the climate.
Here's the situation. Decades in the making, the Paris Agreement united the U.S., China, and more than 190 other nations in a push to limit fossil fuel pollution. The UN-sponsored plan secured pledges to cut greenhouse gases, the emissions that trap heat in the Earth's atmosphere, in an effort to avoid the rising seas and other environmental disasters that climate models predict. But even if all pledges are met, the globe is expected to warm by as much as 3.4 degrees Celsius this century, more than the UN target of well below 2 degrees. Meeting the Paris Agreement means that governments will have to offer more incentives for clean energy, scale back support for fossil fuels, make emissions more costly, and reduce deforestation. It's estimated that the deal will require $13.5 trillion of spending through 2030. Here's the argument. Unlike past climate pacts such as the Kyoto Protocol, each country set its own Paris targets and then promised to revisit and improve them. The U.S. was primed to play a lead role in climate change, but Trump's Energy Independence Executive Order reverses Obama-era rules and directives put in place to combat climate change, and expands production of coal, the dirtiest fossil fuel. The resulting policies threaten the global fight against climate change. Without the U.S. commitment to emissions reduction, other countries may join it in abandoning the Paris Agreement. This could make it almost impossible and even more expensive down the line to stop climate change. Optimists argue that the shift to a lower carbon future is already underway. Businesses, cities, and U.S. states, such as California, are already investing in wind and solar and taking other steps to make it work.
I've actually been called an environmentalist, if you can believe that.
inherent attraction to light and being human. And I think on a very deep psychological level, light is this way in which we experience the energy surrounding us in a very personal manner. My name is Matt Dilling. I'm the founder of Light Bright Neon Studio, and we manufacture, produce, and restore neon works of art and design. Origins of the creative content of a lot of the work at Light Bright comes from a variety of sources. Sometimes people come with a napkin sketch, some people come with an Adobe Illustrator file, and we have a whole design team who then we kind of work together to help create layouts of what it might look like. Scale it up and create a paper template using a pen plotter. And that paper template actually becomes our guide for what we're going to bend the neon to. We take from the office into the glass shop. We pick out the right size tubing with the right color for the right size project. From there, we heat up the glass tubing. The torches heat the glass well in excess of 1,000 degrees in order for it to get into its molten state. We heat up and bend the glass tubing to match the template. One of our chandeliers has over 100 different bends in it. So each one of those bends has to be marked for a heated up bend. We also have to allow the glass to cool between the bends so that the next area can be worked on and heated up in its own unique fashion. It turns into spaghetti, and then we have to make sure that that spaghetti lines back up and cools to the template. We use a blow hose to connect our mouth to the tube, create a volume that's closed, and we can control the pressure in there with our mouth. There's just a variety of challenges that come up inherently in working with glass. Glass can crack due to stress, and sometimes you'll just have a batch that all it wants to do when it gets near a torch is crack. After we've bent various components, we have to go in using the crossfire or the hand torch and actually weld all of those pieces together. The last step on that is then to weld on electrodes onto either end. Each one of those steps is very, very specific. I draw inspiration from so many different experiences. It's hard to come up with one thing that's particular, but one of the ways that I really am able to connect with the creative is to float. Floating is a similar experience to meditation, to psychedelics. Going into a blackened room and laying out in a body of water and salt that's heated to your body temperature, and it allows for all sort of external stimulation to fall away. And your internal world really begins to bubble up and manifest. You really get to experience a different relationship to your mind. I work with neon because I can't not work with it. It's so challenging and so rewarding. And those things are so intertwined that there's no way of separating it out. I learn so much and continue to learn so much by working with it. I find so much inspiration in working with it, and I just continue to experience new and different things through the medium. It's that close to me at this point. Once the neon tube is completed, we have to hook it up to our manifold for bombarding. The manifold is opened, a vacuum is drawn. We check the tube for leaks with our Tesla coil. We close the tube back off, and we heat it up using a very large and powerful transformer. As the tube is heated up, it releases anything that's not inert inside the tube, and we evacuate that out. We introduce the gas into it, and we seal the tube off, sealing into that tube whatever gas we introduced into it. think my favorite part of making a neon light is when I see it lit up for the first time. Different gases, when electrified, emit different wavelengths of light. Neon gas is this very bright orange, fiery red color. Argon gas creates a very intense blue, but that light output that is produced can then be expressed in a different wavelength by coating the inside of the tubes with a phosphor coating that takes that one wavelength of light and emits a different wavelength. We bring it over to the aging table where we hook it up to an age-in transformer and allow it to settle, age the gas in that we've introduced to it. There's always a stray particle of something left inside the tube. But that time that the oxide coating can act to scrub whatever is left inside the tube while things are getting settled into place. Once the tubes are aged in, we move on to our process of assembling two halves of the fixture together in a jig, gluing up the center of the fixture to its spindle. Once the adhesive dried, we would connect the wires from the fixture together into a transformer, and we turn on power and it lights up. Part of what we love about what we do here is that we try and put out into the world the kind of things that we'd like to see. I still am surprised when it lights up. I'm still excited when I get to see it illuminated. There's an ineffable quality to it. To me, it is this insight into the inner workings of the universe. It literally is. It's a way of looking at what is surrounding us in the cosmos in a new light.
bit like an addiction. You've got to make something. You have to do something. It's borderline obsession. And every bike we build is my favourite bike at the time, and as soon as it's done, I want to build another one. Sven Cycles is something I've been thinking about ever since I started cycling in my late teens. We want bikes that ultimately you'll really enjoy riding. There's never a bike that's the same. There's always a slight change. And as we build them individually as well, they have the marks of a bike that's built by hand. Most people I know cycle have an idea of their dream bicycle, and it may be an evolving idea you've had in your head. And we've worked with a lot of people that have come to us with sketches and scrapbooks. It's really, really nice to build something that's just one-off and unique. I think a lot of people see a bicycle as two wheels and a frame in the middle. There are a lot of subtle changes and nuances in design which can change the riding characteristics quite dramatically. I'm a really big fan of modernist architecture, and the simplicity of a modernist building is really hard to achieve. And with some of our bikes, they may look very simple, but I think people should not underestimate the time and effort that goes into designing a product. Tubing is key to a bike's feel and ride. Reynolds tubing has been in my life ever since I can remember. Growing up, I could never afford a frame manufactured with their tubing. We can now put a badge on our bike saying manufactured Reynolds, which is a sort of thing as a kid I just wouldn't have believed was going to happen. Every part of the bike has a specific tube. It's not universal. The first thing we do is get the tubes out, check they're correct, check the wall thicknesses, sand the edges, make sure it's all really clean, because if it's not clean, the tubes won't join together correctly. We build in steel because I still believe it's one of the best materials to use. It's been used in bikes since the late 1800s, and they're still using it now for a very good reason. It's the flexibility that we can replace the tube, repaint the bike, and you wouldn't know it's damaged. I just like working with it. It's very sculptural. This isn't sort of aerospace precision engineering. It's a steel rule and a marker. So when we're cutting the tubes, it's within a mil or two. But what we're trying to do is take the best from bicycle building in the past and add a little bit of modern flair to it. There's various techniques for building bicycles. We do a thing called fillet brazing, where you connect a pipe together. We use a bronze rod and a flame. We heat the tubes up to the same temperature and we fill the joint with bronze. And it gives a very, very sort of fluid, lovely, sort of quite sculptural feel. You've got to practice. You've got to be able to judge material temperatures. You've got to just look at it and you just get a feel for it. It's the stage where your tubes start to look a bit like a bicycle. My father's a jeweller. He'd make sort of very pretty things, which are lovely, but for me, they don't really have any function. What I love about bicycles, you can start on a Monday with a box of tubes, you can be riding it by the weekend, and it can last you for the rest of your life. Outside of the frame and forks, the other most important part is the wheels and tyres. When you build the wheels, you have to lace them, so there's little holes going all the way around the rim. You poke the spoke through. We do build all our wheels by hand here because a machine can't get 30 years worth of wheel building experience. Colour is very, very personal. With any of our bikes, you can have them painted whatever colour you want. We've matched one to a teapot, so we can get that scanned and we can match that, or someone's favourite item of clothing. I like to let the bike sit for 4 or 5 days minimum, just so the paint can have time to cure a little bit, and then we assemble it. We get out all the new components, and it's a case of putting them together. Some bikes you can assemble in 3 hours, some will take 3 days. And we've built bikes that cost in the £10,000 plus mark. Some people, they're saving up and this is their bike and they're going to own it for the rest of their lives. So we just want to make sure they get the right thing. I think the bike for me was the first time I had some freedom. So as soon as I had one, I was off. A lot of people still get that thrill as when they were a kid blasting down a hill, wind going through their hair. It's fun. Everyone has their favourite jacket or something that just makes them feel good. If you've got a bike that fits well, you actually feel part of it. Building bicycles as a creative outlet is fantastic. It's not something you do because you're going to get a big paycheck at the end of the day. You do it something you have a passion for it.
If you ever saw a wooden surfboard, it was probably hanging in somebody's house or underneath the deck. But kind of in the last 10 or 15 years, wood has made a big comeback. They surf wonderfully. It's beautiful and it feels great to be on one of them. I always had a love for wood and kind of passionate about things that went in the water. I've kind of been around wooden boats most of my life. There's just so much character. The way they're built, the stories that come with them, a lot of that has translated over to why we build surfboards the way we do. When we first started thinking about building surfboards, wood was the natural material we chose. They have a very high strength to weight ratio. Wooden surfboards have the longest history of use in the surf world than any other material. People have been surfing wooden surfboards since kind of the first documented history of people riding waves. The board starts in CAD, where we take a 3D model, break down the shape, and kind of create frames and templates and all the inner parts of the board that we get cut on a CNC machine. We take those frames and we just pop them out, assemble the frame into kind of a skeleton. We go out to our lumber shed, pick a bunch of cedar, and bring them into our mill shop, put glue along the edges, clamp it all together into a panel. Everything's book matched. You have symmetry in the colors and texture of the wood. Cut your outline. Take our assembled frame, gently put it down right on top of the plank. Once that foundation is started, you're basically building up the three-dimensional shape, the outside part of the board, using lots of strips that kind of interlock and fit together. Every piece of wood is going to be different, and it's all going to react differently. There are frustrations with it, but I think that's one of the things that keeps it challenging. You learn to read the kind of what the grain lines are doing and what the color of the wood is telling you. Once those rails are cleaned up, we put our top planks on. It's a little bit like putting a lid on a box. It's like, this is it. Whatever's inside that board is staying inside that board. And by tensioning some rope, you can clamp the two together. It's like a time capsule. What makes our boards unique are they are built right here in York. They're built using material that grows right here in the state of Maine. They're built 100% by hand by local craftspeople and surfers. There's a lot of time that goes into these boards, between 40 and 60 hours, start to finish. We wanted to build surfboards that were as hollow as they could be, but still be strong enough to work well. Too light and they don't surf well, but too heavy and they don't surf well. So there's a balance point there, and that's where we try to be. Taking the board off the rocker table once the top has gone on, that is by far one of my top favorite parts. It's just you and a shaping stand, a board, and a hand plane. Everything else is out of your view. It's simple, it's pleasurable, it's quiet. You can be with your thoughts and you can just kind of be present. There's something about taking a nice sharp edge tool to a beautiful piece of wood and feeling the curls coming off and knowing that every pass that you're making, you're kind of getting it closer and closer to what you have in mind. Once we've shaped it down and the board's looking like it's supposed to look like, it's time for it to go into the glassing room. 4-ounce fiberglass, laying it over the board, draping it over the edges, cutting it, applying epoxy, and on the board. Once both sides are lamb coated, it's time to put in the hardware. Drill and router and install the fin box. And on the other side, we drill and put in the leash plug and a vent. There's a lot of air just naturally inside the board, and that air wants to expand and contract with temperature changes. And that vent has a little piece of Gore-Tex fabric in it, and it allows air to kind of breathe both ways, but it doesn't allow water to get in. Once all that hardware is put in, it goes back into the glassing room. We brush a nice, beautiful, thick coat of epoxy over the whole surface, and that we call a gloss coat. That's supposed to look beautiful and glossy and shiny and flawless. You get to see that board come to life. Whatever the colors in the wood, they really come out. It just makes it look like candy. You just want to touch it and run your hands down it, and it's just kind of the icing on the cake. Once everything is hard, we put it into what we call the oven, get that epoxy to cure, really kind of bake it, and just get it to harden. Put in the fin, screw in the vent, and ship it out. We just love the idea of building something that's sustainable and long-lasting and made by hand. Kind of gives you a deeper connection to the product over something you might buy on a shelf. When a customer gets the board, they feel it. They 100% feel the amount of work and the amount of passion that went into the board. So I'm not really looking at hours and efficiency. We're looking at like doing it right and enjoying it as we go.
Ma Baoli, better known as Gang La, is one of the 4 Grand Marshals leading New York's Pride Parade this year. But in the country he comes from, being gay is still a social taboo. The CEO of a Beijing-based internet company is on a mission to improve the lives of millions of gay men in China.
对于每一个 LGBT 人群来说，即使这个国家不允许你跟同性爱人结婚，但是你仍然要勇敢地去选择你自己的生活，你仍然应该拥有幸福生活的权利。
Ma's company Blue City runs an app and a website specifically for gay men. Blued is one of the biggest gay social networking apps in the world, with an estimated 30 million registered users. Unlike most other apps, Blued is more than just dating or hookups.
大家可以在我们这个软件里面找他自己的情感，然后可以阅读相关的内容，然后可以进行一些娱乐，比如玩游戏啊，比如看直播啊等等。
Back in 2000, when Ma studied at a police school in northern China, he realized he didn't feel like everyone else.
因为他们都找女朋友，然后谈恋爱，但是我对长得好看的同性的男生，我反而觉得对我更有吸引力。所以那个时候我就到互联网上去找这样的一些资料，然后希望能够告诉我自己我到底是谁。互联网上所有的信息都是负面的，都是错的，就是说同性恋要电击疗法，要被治疗，然后要吃药等等。
After visiting some foreign websites with different attitudes to homosexuality, Ma created his own site for a Chinese audience, encouraging people that
他们也是正常的，他们不用自卑，然后也不用自杀。
Even though attitudes towards homosexuals are slowly changing in China, it's still a social stigma. The virtual world of Blued, where members can be open about their sexuality, is for most a striking contrast to their real lives. This is live streaming, a function added to Blued in late 2015, right as the internet craze was starting to take off in China. Many self-made stars like Jin make decent amounts of money by receiving audiences virtual currencies and gifts.
我们不是彼此的初恋，我们初恋这种事儿都不靠谱啊。
For Kyle and Klaus, a couple who have come out, live streaming on Blued means something different.
其实我经常会收到很多粉丝的一些互动的留言，就是类似就是说你们让我们看到了同志情侣之间的一些希望啊，我看到这样的留言我是很欣慰。
The government's rules for acceptable content online may shift quickly in China, with LGBT material in a grey area. Many companies feel the chill of the recent internet crackdown, but Blue City still runs as usual. Ma has won the Chinese government's trust by helping with HIV prevention among gay men. A third of the company's staff are dedicated to screening pornographic and politically sensitive content.
我不太多的愿意去对抗，我更多的愿意去对话，去改变他们的想法。我觉得这个可能在中国来说是更有效的。
In the past 5 years, Blue City has grown from a team of 7 people to a promising business with about 250 staff. Ma said the company earned over $15 million last year, mainly through advertising and selling virtual currencies to live streaming audiences. Now the company is expanding overseas.
我希望吧，通过我们的努力，Blue能够成为全球第一家在美国纳斯达克或者是纽交所上市的这样的同志互联网公司。